Hello, welcome back to the Underhand Free Throw. I am Simon, and today me and my co-host Ian are doing a short little series of videos in which we're going to talk about some teams that are sleeping giants, is what we're calling them. They're maybe a little bit better than their record says that they are, and we're going to talk about why that is and whether we should be taking these teams a little bit more seriously over the course of the rest of the season. Also, if you're just stumbling across this video and you never heard of us before, we upload fairly frequently. We try to do 2 or 3 times a week. We talk about the NBA as many channels do, but we try to take a step back and take a more long-term look at how teams are going, how the season is progressing, and how players are improving and teams are changing over time rather than talking about just the day-to-day goings on of the league. If you're interested in that sort of thing, please consider subscribing. So with that out of the way, the team that we're going to be talking about today is the New Orleans Pelicans. Is this one of the sleeping giant teams in the NBA and a team that we should take a little bit more seriously?
But let's talk about a team that is basically our biggest sleeping giant here in terms of the biggest discrepancy between their record and some other numbers, and that is the New Orleans Pelicans. The Pellies, the Canes, the Anno, whatever. There's no good short form for the New Orleans Pelicans that I know about.
Yeah, the Pelicans are kind of a weird team because they're 10-7 as we record this, and I imagine their record is probably going to stay somewhat middling for a while, but by the stats, they look really good. They're the 4th overall team by net rating, but they're up there with kind of like the elite of the NBA, up there with the Celtics and the Cavaliers and the Suns. And surprisingly, too, I don't think many people necessarily expected this, but they've been one of the better defensive teams in the NBA up to this point in the season, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you look at their roster. And you can tell there's a lot of mismatched pieces. There's a lack of elite rim protector. No slight to Jonas Valanciunas. He's, a smart defender who can do positive things for your team positionally, but not a guy who's going to necessarily deter or block a lot of shots at the rim. Really small backcourt. And Zion Williamson, who has been much maligned for his lack of defensive ability, but they're really holding up. So, I mean, they obviously do have some excellent defenders on the roster, whether it's like Jose Alvarado or Herb Jones, but typically the teams that are elite defensively are the ones that have like a cohesive system that really works together, and that's not necessarily what you would expect to see with the Pelicans. But on the other side of the ball, they're, in addition to being a good defense, they're also just like a really, really good offense, which makes sense given how many great offensive pieces they have and, talent plus a whole bunch of ways to create mismatches with other teams. Like Zion is just a walking mismatch. Brandon Ingram is often a mismatch, just given his length and how easily he can get a shot over anyone. Jonas Valanciunas provides scoring around the basket, which a lot of teams don't have a great way of dealing with. It makes sense why this team is so good on offense, but why do you think they've been so good overall, and why don't you think it's quite played out in their record so far?
I mean, the record's fine, right? Like they're 10-7, so they're 5th in the West. They're kind of tied with a whole bunch of they're in that group that we were talking about earlier, where they're these all these teams sort of chunked together with 10 wins and 7 losses. Feels like half the NBA has 10 wins and 7 losses. They played Boston recently. That tends to result in a loss. Yeah, I mean it's just early enough that we're not seeing it show up, but like it's not like they're losing. I think it's more crazy that they're somewhere between the 9th and 13th best team in the league based on record, but they're top 3 in their net rating, they're top 3 in their simple rating. They're top 4 defense and they're top 4 offense and a top 7 defense. The defense I don't really expect to hold up. They were really struggling with Zion on the floor early in the season, like just because his defense looked so bad. But that trend has sort of reversed, and now they're actually better with Zion on the floor than off. My first instinct was going to be like, well, Zion's missed some games and he hasn't played as many minutes as you'd think. So that means a little bit more Trey Murphy. That means more Herb Jones. That means more Larry Nance. That means that their defense is going to be better, but there's nothing in the numbers to suggest that Zion is like tanking their defense anymore. But I do think the fact that they've established like significant rotation roles for Larry Nance, Trey Murphy, Herb Jones, Najee Marshall has been consistently in the rotation and is a sort of like, I'm not saying like he's another just sort of versatile switchy wing. So when you tune into a New Orleans game, like sometimes Zion's not playing, but they have this like I haven't even mentioned like, Brandon Ingram, like who's been arguably their best player, shooting like, basically never missing from three. Like they'll have like CJ and Jonas Valanciunas on and a whole bunch of wings, or sometimes it'll be like CJ and Ingram and Herb Jones and Trey Murphy and Larry Nance, and they just have this like ultra switchy, versatile, active, long-armed kind of unit out there. That's working for them on defense. Also, Jonas Valanciunas is one of those, like he's much maligned for his defense, and I understand why. He's definitely heavy-footed. He definitely.
Mhm.
Like he's one of those centers that looks so bad if you can trap him in sort of those 2-on-1 situations where he has to make the right read. He usually just ends up trapped in no man's land and just kind of he sticks his hands up and he like bends over in this really like awkward defensive stance.
Yeah.
And it looks bad. And if anyone scores on that, you're like, oh, Jonas Valanciunas he's just a walking like mismatch for the other team, or just like a defensive scheme problem. But like when you watch a lot of Jonas Valanciunas, like those you do see that exact play I'm talking about, and it doesn't look good. But he's just really like robotically solid in a lot of his rotations. He's very like dutiful in his coverages. He's not a player that sort of just like he doesn't make a whole lot of mistakes. He does the exact same thing every time. His limitations are very clear, but he's not like getting backdoor cut because he wasn't paying attention, or he's not like he's sort of a dutiful soldier on defense. So it's not as ugly as maybe like some people think it would be. That being said, they're a way better defensive team with Jonas Valanciunas off the floor. Like those Larry Nance lineups, him at center with any configuration, whether it's Zion or not, like they work out a lot better.
Yeah, and Larry Nance, I mean, he has the best individual defensive rating on the team for anyone who's receiving significant minutes. Like he's just such a smart defender, and he's actually like a pretty decent rim deterrent, which you wouldn't expect for a guy who's like 6'7" or 6'8", but like he has long arms and hops and
Oh yeah,
and knows where to be. So he's really good at catching guys like during their drive to the rim. So yeah, I mean, I'm really glad to see him succeeding in kind of like the backup big man role for the Pelicans. I enjoyed our Larry Nance experience here in Portland, even though he was kind of miscast as our three, and definitely was not the right fit for him in that role on either side of the ball. But he's really had a resurgence in New Orleans, which is probably why they extended him this offseason.
When Larry Nance is on the floor, they're just murdering teams. They've got a net rating of like plus 12. They're holding teams to 104 points per 100 possessions. Like they're killing teams with Larry Nance on the floor. Herb Jones, Brandon Ingram, like they just have a lot of lineup flexibility. And I think when we were talking about New Orleans and our sort of seasons projections, we were wondering like there's a lot of potential lineup flexibility here if some of these things sort of work out. And while Trey Murphy has not been one of the plus minus darlings there, I really think like him and Najee Marshall and Dyson Daniels starting to creep in and get a little bit of minutes now. I got to have a nice Dyson Daniels experience a couple games ago, and he looked like a real NBA player, which was exciting for them both in the short term and the long term. And I think everything is, even though it's not showing up intensely in their record, like things are going, I say this is like near best case scenario for them in terms of just how the basketball product is working out on the floor. And that's without Zion even like having the most monstrous season. Like this isn't like Zion's been kind of up and down, and he's not.
And the same with CJ as well. So I mean, Brandon Ingram being so consistent has really helped that out a lot. And I hope the Dyson Daniels experience continues to be great. Like the one thing that's surprised me is he's been really solid offensively. Like he hasn't looked terrible. Like he can shoot a little bit. And then obviously, like one of the main reasons he was drafted so high was for his playmaking. But like he's a big guard, and I think especially being able to just like kind of preserve CJ McCollum's body throughout the regular season, like having a really capable playmaker come in and be able to hold the fort during those minutes, along with Jose Alvarado. That's going to be huge if they have kind of like three lead playmaking guards who can all come in. I mean, maybe calling Jose Alvarado a lead playmaker is a bit of a stretch, but they have
Yeah,
three guys who can like really shore up that position for them.
yeah. Jose Alvarado, it's like you always you never know whether you're sort of underrating him or overrating him. Like he's very exciting when he's out there in the court, so it's easy to kind of fall in love. His he's definitely made some improvements to his shooting since last season.
Yeah.
So far, he's been like a fairly dependable 3-point shooter, where he was kind of a non-shooter last year, which allows him, like last year when he'd come in, he'd be driving into the paint a lot, and that's like there's kind of like a cap on how useful a Jose Alvarado drive is. So the fact that he can play a little bit more spot up and kind of be more in that Patrick Beverly pest kind of all around, like pesky guy who does a little bit of playmaking and can be a stand-up shooter next to his more talented offensive teammates, while also just having this like ferocity and fearlessness that kind of like leads to some unexpected offense and defense in a lot of key moments. Is like, I think that New Orleans fans should be happy about the progression of Jose Alvarado.
The shooting is just like has really unlocked this team's offense in a lot of ways. That was one thing I was a little bit concerned about when we did our preview going into the season of whether the shooting could hold up. But pretty much everyone on the floor who's playing in a meaningful role can shoot, other than, I mean, CJ's been rough to start the season, but like he has a long track record of being a great shooter. So you'd expect he can rebound. Herb Jones is the one guy who can't really shoot, but
Yep.
at the same time, like you have to have him out there because he's just so good on the other end of the floor. And then Zion doesn't shoot. Surprisingly, he's actually been a really good 3-point shooter so far this season on very limited attempts, but he just doesn't really take them. But that's fine because you don't
He's
want
taken
a guy who's
six threes, six
and made
total
half
threes,
of them.
and made 3 of them.
But you don't really want Zion shooting. You want him pressuring the rim and getting
Yeah,
offensive rebounds and all the stuff that he does really well.
yeah. I mean, I think this is a great. I think this is a great start for them. I think like as long as they keep playing like this, we'll see. We'll see how the defense holds up, because I think I can't remember. I can't remember what you predicted, but I thought they were going to be a really bad defense. I thought it was like, how are you going to have Jonas Valanciunas and Zion both playing, over 20 minutes a game and put and with CJ McCollum and expect to put a defense around that. But so far they've been doing it. I expect that to fall, but I expect them to like stay in the fight for home court advantage, at least in the West.
I actually think the defense is going to hold up ish. I'm not going to say they're going to maintain being like one of the best defensive teams in the NBA the rest of the season. That might be a little bit unrealistic. But the one thing I'm realizing, especially this year, is teams that have like really good point of attack defenders, even if the rim protection isn't quite like up to snuff, they can hold up. And the Pelicans have that. CJ is probably the weak point, but everyone else that's defending ball handlers is really stout. Even Jose Alvarado, despite his short stature. But they're really good at just preventing opposing playmakers from like diving into the paint and collapsing the defense. And if you can stop the initial leak, I think a lot of times you can prevent the whole foundation from cracking and falling apart. And like you said, Jonas Valanciunas, he's not terrible if he's not overwhelmed. And a lot of centers in the NBA are going to look really bad on defense if you have them in a 2-on-1, where the guy who's being screened is behind the ball handler, and they have both a ball handler and a roll man attacking them and proceeding to the rim. There's very few centers who can defend that well. So I wouldn't malign Valanciunas too much for that, but thankfully, if you have really good point of attack defenders, you can avoid that situation from happening all that often.
Yeah, two things about that. One, and just kind of to summarize what I meant about Val earlier, was like he doesn't always necessarily stop the ball, but he typically makes the right play. It's just sometimes he is too slow, and it's not a strong enough contest. But generally, I feel like I watch him make the right defensive decision, and sometimes that's not enough. The other thing is that behind that point of attack defense, even though they're not necessarily having a classic drop big rim protector, they have a lot of length in the sort of like they defend the nail really well. They collapse into the paint really quick. And so even if you're getting past that, point of attack defense, all of a sudden it's like Brandon Ingram and Herb Jones and Trey Murphy Jr. and Larry Nance, and they're all just kind of around, and they're all very long, and it gets very chaotic in there. So I mean, we now have a vision for how the New Orleans Pelicans defense works. So it's a little bit it's easier to imagine. We don't have to like, well, how are they ever going to put a defense together with Zion and Valanciunas? It's like, well, this is how they're going to do it. If they keep it up, they're going to be a very dangerous team. I don't expect them to, stay in the top 10, but I mean, if they did, that'd be like, okay, you're a contender. If you can stay healthy with this team, with this offensive firepower, and keep a top 10 defense, that's what a NBA contender is.
Yeah, I think at the start of the season, we projected the Pelicans to kind of fall into the play-in, upper level of the play-in, like 7-8 seed, but in the play-in regardless. Do you still have them there, or have the early signs been enough where you think this is going to be a playoff team, or maybe even a guaranteed playoff team, or maybe even a home court advantage team?
Man, the only thing that we like know more about than we did at the beginning of the season is like we've actually seen these teams play a little bit, which obviously helps a lot. But there's so many teams in the West, it's still very hard to project them. Like I'm putting them in an order now with more knowledge, but I'm not like doing it with better like they're in the 5 seed right now, and below them there's the Blazers, and then there's the Nuggets, Mavericks, and Grizzlies. And after the all teams that could just kind of put it together a little bit better. Them. Yeah, like that wouldn't be surprising to anyone. Like if you're surprised by that, I don't know what how you're thinking about the NBA. And then after those guys, we've got the Timberwolves and the Warriors, who both are objectively playing bad basketball right now. But if anyone was surprised that either of those teams kind of put it together and went on a run, they could leapfrog them too. So the Pelicans in 5th right now, if they lost a couple games and some of these teams started playing a little bit better, like they could be down in 11th if they went on a losing streak. So like in terms of it's still really chaotic from a prediction standpoint, but I really like what I see with the Pelicans. They've answered a lot of my doubts about them. So I definitely, if I knew that and was going back and doing projections again, I would definitely bump them up a little bit higher, kind of just more in that sort of like 4, 5, 6 space, like just the next sort of like fighting for home court rather than fighting to get it out of the play-in.
Yeah, I think I would too. Just a couple of spots, not to the top of the conference exactly, but in that 5-6 range, guaranteed playoff appearance, but not a home court advantage. I think they've earned at least that. And the other thing to remember is like this team is still really young for the most part. And the couple older guys that they have, one of them is CJ McCollum, who's been playing terribly, at least from like an offensive efficiency standpoint to start the year. So there is like progression to the mean possibility there, where he just like plays more up to his usual standard and is a better basketball player. So, I mean, the Pelicans have been great so far, and there's also room for improvement. We could talk about how their defense could fall off, but they could also get better, especially on the offensive side of the ball, to be just like the clear best team, or one of the 1 or 2 best teams in the NBA in offense, and really solidify that. So I think there's a lot of upside. Yeah.
CJ is doing a ton of playmaking, like, compared to in Portland. I mean, you've probably watched so much CJ. You've seen him in that kind of backup point guard role. Like, he would play in some lineups with Dame on the bench in Portland. And so, he's like, it's not like he's a bad passer or anything like that, but his role in this New Orleans offense is to be like kind of a lead initiator and playmaker. And I can't really tell, like, is it not from a playmaking perspective, it seems to be going well. He's just shooting the ball really poorly right now.
Yeah. He's just not making shots.
Like, I feel if he just has a nice little shooting run over a couple weeks, just kind of gets hot for a while, all of a sudden we're, like looking at a guy who's averaging sort of 20 and 7 and is like just great lead guard in the NBA. So I'm not that worried about CJ. He doesn't look slow or anything out like that. It's not like he doesn't look like he's getting old or anything like that. But yeah, he's just missing a lot of shots, missing shots at a level that he has never missed. Actually, he's basically posting career lows
Yeah.
across the board.
Yeah, which is why I
Um,
think it's safe to expect him to bounce back a little bit.
yeah,